So, here's the story. I'm 35, married to Leah, who's 33. We've been together for almost 10 years. Up until a few months ago, I thought we were rock solid, the kind of couple that knew each other inside and out. We'd been through it all: good jobs, bad jobs, family drama, even a move across the country. But lately, Leah's been acting strange. She's always been a bit of a workaholic, but in the last year, her job became her whole life. She'd started coming home late, even on weekends, and she'd dodge any questions about her work nights with vague answers like, "It's just a big project," or "I was meeting a friend from work." At first, I was sympathetic. Leah's new boss, David, is a real piece of work. He's that typical corporate control freak who demands perfection, always pushing his team harder and harder. Leah had told me she found him exhausting, that she couldn't stand his nitpicking and impossible deadlines. But then things started to feel off. She wasn't complaining about him anymore, wasn't venting to me like she used to. Instead, her eyes would glaze over whenever I brought up her job or asked about her day. I tried to ignore it, but the tension was starting to creep into every corner of our lives. I felt like I was living with a stranger. The whole routine was bizarre, but I told myself she was just stressed, maybe tired of the grind. But one evening, my friend and I ran into her at a bar when she was supposed to be working late. She was with a man I didn't recognize, and I'll tell you, it didn't look like a business meeting. They were too close, too comfortable. When I confronted her about it later, she brushed it off, saying it was just a coworker and they were blowing off steam. I didn't buy it, but I had no proof. A few weeks passed, and the red flags just kept piling up. Leah was on her phone constantly, always texting or checking her messages, but she'd hide the screen whenever I was nearby. My gut told me something was wrong, but without evidence, I felt trapped in this nightmare of suspicion. Then came the night that confirmed everything. She came home reeking of a cologne I knew wasn't hers. That's when I finally decided to play along and act clueless, all while gathering as much evidence as I could. Meanwhile, my own work life wasn't any easier. My boss, Mark, was even worse than Leah's boss, David. Mark is the kind of guy who'd make you redo a report 10 times just to feel important. He'd chew me out in front of the team over the smallest mistakes, nitpicking my work and hinting I wasn't meeting expectations. I wanted to leave, but in this job market, it wasn't like I had many options. Now, here's where things took an unexpected twist. At the company holiday party, Mark's wife, Alicia, approached me. She's in her late 30s, smart, funny, and stunning. Someone who's always made an impression. She usually kept to herself, but that night she was different. She came up to me, a bit tipsy, and made some offhand comment about how she knew life under Mark could be hell. She looked at me in a way that left little to the imagination. For a second, I thought it was a joke or maybe just the alcohol talking, but then she dropped the bomb. "I know things aren't exactly great in your life either," she said, giving me this knowing look that sent a chill down my spine. I played it cool, just nodding along, but the conversation was still haunting me a week later. I'd seen her around a few times, and each time, she'd give me this sly smile or make some casual comment about Mark's behavior at work. Then she told me she suspected Leah was seeing someone else, and that Mark was helping cover it up. That night, I didn't sleep. If Alicia was right, then my boss, the guy who seemed to live to make my life miserable, was helping Leah hide an affair. I couldn't take it. I had to find out the truth. So, I started following her discreetly, checking her phone records, tracking her location when I could. It didn't take long to confirm my worst suspicions. She'd been lying, meeting up with some guy she called a friend. But it was obvious what was really going on. The next week, Alicia and I found ourselves alone again, this time at a small company event. She was even bolder this time, leaning in close, whispering about how fed up she was with Mark's control over her life. I wasn't sure where this was going until she said, "Why don't we both get even?" I'll admit, I was taken aback. The thought of crossing that line was both thrilling and terrifying. Alicia was serious. She was fed up with Mark and his manipulations, and she knew I was hurting too. I didn't say yes or no, but the thought lingered, and I couldn't shake it. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. Alicia's glances, her casual touches, the way she seemed to be daring me to take things further. A few nights later, I was at a bar, drowning my sorrows when Alicia texted me. "Want to meet up?" she asked, and without thinking, I found myself agreeing. When I walked into the hotel lobby where she was waiting, she smiled in a way that made it clear she was completely aware of the revenge we were about to get on both of our cheating spouses. I'd never done anything like this before, but in that moment, it felt like the only option. As we sat there, talking, laughing, I felt a strange sense of relief. Alicia and I met up at the hotel bar, a cozy little spot away from prying eyes. I'll admit, I felt out of my depth, but Alicia seemed perfectly at ease. She ordered a drink, her eyes gleaming with this mischievous, almost reckless excitement. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, sitting across from my boss's wife, plotting a payback neither of our spouses would see coming. We talked, easing into conversation, and eventually, the conversation turned to our respective betrayals. She told me about how Mark had always been controlling, even more so in the last few years, treating her less like a partner and more like a trophy to show off when it suited him. I could tell she was hurt, angry, and, like me, just tired of being treated like she was disposable. She admitted she'd caught him flirting with some woman at an office event a few years back, but she brushed it off, choosing not to make a scene. I got the feeling she'd been holding on to a lot more resentment than she let on. I opened up, too, sharing how Leah's behavior had shifted over the past few months, how the late nights, the constant texting, and the smell of that stranger's cologne had slowly eroded any trust one had in her. I felt a pang of guilt, even as I told Alicia about it, but talking to her was like letting out a breath I'd been holding for too long. She was the only person who truly understood what I was going through, and for the first time, I felt validated. Before I knew it, Alicia leaned in close, her hand resting lightly on mine. "We both deserve better," she murmured, her gaze locked on mine. There was no ambiguity in her tone, no mistaking what she was suggesting. My heart was pounding, and every rational thought I had went right out the window. I could have backed out right then, made up some excuse to leave, but I didn't. I let myself get caught up in the moment, in the thrill of doing something that felt as dangerous as it did liberating. We spent hours talking, laughing, even sharing stories that, looking back, at some point, Alicia invited me up to her room, and I knew exactly where this was going. I could feel every nerve in my body lighting up as I followed her to the elevator, and when the doors closed, she turned to me with that same sly smile I'd seen at the office party. I'll spare the details, but let's just say it was like all that pent-up frustration and anger finally found an outlet. The next morning, I woke up in her hotel room, half expecting regret to come crashing down, but it didn't. Instead, there was a sense of satisfaction, of closure, even a bit of triumph. Alicia was already awake, scrolling through her phone, her expression calm, even content. She glanced at me, smirking. "How do you feel?" "Better than I have in months," I replied, and I meant it. I knew what we'd done was wrong, that two wrongs don't make a right. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. Alicia and I had taken control of our lives in a way that felt empowering, like we were reclaiming something our spouses had stolen from us. We spent the morning talking more about our next steps. Alicia hinted that she'd been planning her own way out from Mark's control for a while. Apparently, she had some dirt on him from his work, a few things he wouldn't want getting out if they ever went to court. She was smart and calculating, and I could see why Mark probably felt threatened by her. As we left the hotel, she squeezed my hand. "This isn't over. Not for either of us," she whispered, giving me one last smile before walking away. And she was right. This was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Alicia and I kept in touch. We were careful, meeting discreetly, only texting from burner phones we'd bought just for this. The thrill of the affair became addictive, and every time we met, it felt like we were pushing the boundaries just a bit further. Each encounter was a small act of rebellion against our partners, a way of clawing back the control they'd taken from us. And with every encounter, I felt that same twisted satisfaction, like I was finally settling the score. At home, I continued to play the role of the oblivious husband. Leah seemed relieved that I wasn't asking questions anymore, that I wasn't suspicious or confrontational. I'd catch her sneaking off to text her friend now and then, and every time she did, I felt a dark, smug satisfaction. She had no idea what I was up to, just as I had no idea what she was doing on her late nights out. One night, Leah told me she'd be staying late at the office again. She didn't even bother to give me an excuse, just a quick, "Don't wait up for me," before slipping out the door. I knew where she was going, and that was fine with me. I had my own plans. I texted Alicia, who was more than willing to meet up that night. We met at a quiet little bar on the edge of town, a place neither of us would be recognized. When she walked in, she looked at me with that familiar smirk, and it was like our own private joke. We didn't even have to talk about Leah or Mark anymore. It was beyond them at this point. Our revenge had turned into something else entirely, a connection that felt as real as the betrayal that had brought us together. As we sat there, sipping our drinks and laughing like old friends, I realized I didn't feel guilty anymore. I didn't feel conflicted or torn. For once, I felt free, free from Leah's lies, free from the weight of pretending everything was fine. The night Alicia and I met up again, something shifted. We were both in a rare mood. Maybe it was the thrill of everything, the secrecy, the revenge, but it felt like the final act in some twisted play we'd both been forced into. I didn't know it yet, but this night would be the last time we'd meet like this. We were on a mission, and both of us knew it. The conversation turned back to Leah and Mark, as it always did, but there was a calm resolve in Alicia's eyes. "You know," she said, swirling her drink, "Mark isn't as untouchable as he likes to think he is. I've been collecting a few things here and there, waiting for the right moment." She shot me a sideways glance. "And now, I think we've reached it." She leaned in, her voice low. "Leah and Mark aren't just enabling each other, you know? They're in on this together. I'm sure of it. They're both hiding things. And I think it's time they get a taste of their own medicine." The thought made my pulse race. I wanted them to know, wanted them to feel the burn of betrayal that had haunted me for months. Alicia and I hashed out a plan, simple but effective. That night, we shared every shred of evidence we'd gathered. Alicia had text messages, receipts, even a few recorded conversations she'd secretly caught when Mark wasn't paying attention. I had call logs, location histories, and now, thanks to Alicia, I even had messages Leah had sent to Mark detailing their lies. Piece by piece, we stitched together a plan to confront them both. A few days later, I was ready. Leah had planned another late night at work, and I used that as my opening. I sent her a text, "Hey, I'm working late too. Meet me at the Ivy," a restaurant she'd once told me was too pretentious. I'd figured out that's where she went on her dates with Mark. This time, however, I'd be waiting for her, with Alicia by my side. Alicia and I arrived early, taking a secluded booth at the back where we could watch the entrance. We ordered drinks, and I could feel my nerves tingling, part fear, part adrenaline. The minutes ticked by, and then, just as we'd expected, Leah and Mark walked in together, laughing like they hadn't a care in the world. Leah looked more vibrant than she had in months, leaning in close to Mark as he whispered something to her. Alicia's eyes narrowed, and I felt a surge of anger mixed with satisfaction. I caught Leah's gaze from across the room, and the smile froze on her face. Her eyes went wide, darting from me to Alicia, then back to me. She pulled away from Mark, stammering as she clutched at his arm, clearly panicked. Mark turned to look at us, his face twisting in surprise, then anger. I think he knew exactly what was happening. They started to make their way toward us, but Alicia raised a hand, stopping them in their tracks. "Don't bother," she said coolly, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "We know everything." I watched Leah's face turn pale, her eyes filling with dread as she realized her lies had finally caught up to her. She opened her mouth, as if to speak, but no words came out. Mark looked furious, clenching his jaw as he glanced between us. He looked at Alicia, a mixture of rage and disbelief flickering in his eyes. I knew this was the last thing he'd ever expected. I pulled out my phone, flipping through the screenshots, the photos, all the evidence that painted the full, ugly picture of their betrayal. "I can't believe I trusted you," I said, my voice steady but icy. "And I can't believe you thought you'd get away with it." Leah's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret in her eyes. But it was too late. She reached out, almost as if to explain, but I cut her off. Save it. I've already made my peace with this. Alicia turned to Mark. And you? How long did you think you could keep lying to me? Manipulating me? It's pathetic. He didn't answer, just glared at her, seething with frustration but saying nothing. For the first time, he looked small, exposed. The power he'd wielded over me and Alicia was gone, and he knew it. Consider this our last conversation, I said to them both, standing up with Alicia by my side. We left them there, silent, trapped in their own humiliation as every other patron in the restaurant watched them. On the way out, Alicia looked at me, her face flushed with relief and a new kind of peace. It's over, she said softly, squeezing my hand. We finally got our revenge. In the days that followed, the fallout was brutal but freeing. I filed for divorce and moved my things out of the house. Leah's pleas, her texts, her endless calls trying to work things out, I ignored them all. She'd had her chance, and she'd chosen her path. Now, I was choosing mine. As for Alicia, she left Mark too, but our relationship remained more of a strange friendship than anything romantic. The revenge had been satisfying, but we both knew it was time to move on from the toxicity of our marriages. We stayed in touch, a sort of quiet alliance born from shared pain. In the end, I walked away from it all, Leah, Mark, even my job, and started fresh. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine again. And if there's one thing I learned through it all, it's that sometimes the best revenge isn't just getting even. It's reclaiming your freedom, no longer living under the weight of betrayal and lies. It's waking up every day, knowing the past no longer has a hold on you.